Hello, this is 52 Weeks, and this is week number 5. And this week we're going to be looking at Chapter 2, Land Use of the Harrisburg Comprehensive Plan. But before we go to that, I have a little segment I just wanted to look at some of the background and understanding kind of the collective impact and going beyond collective impact. So before we go into that, I want to get into the discussion of community capacity building and continue to refine what this means. A lot of the times I talk about it as collective impact in this process with collective ideas. And I think we need to be thinking about that, kind of going beyond collective impact. I have a link about a very website from the Nonprofit Quarterly looking at how do you go beyond the collective impact process. Understanding that we need to look at past, present conditions of racial and social and class and wealth issues within our city. That's also happening at a national level. It's a great book about the color of law that is highly recommend to go read through and look at how planning and law and policy, and it really gets into our segregated past. So we need to look at this resolving of past and present, also helping neighbors to understand a kind of a neighborhood planning process. What can they, if we're enlightened in this movement of trying to deal with the past, how do we move forward in a learning process? So that's a neighborhood planning process that's highly participatory. It's more grassroots level. It has to be done through the neighborhoods. There's an educational component, I believe, through K through 12 that we need to show our youth how this process works and how they can be involved in the process of planning and shaping their environment. And that's part of civic engagement. We also need to understand how to pull together resources, again, education and small and large scale development on that process, how to do the process of developing from within your communities. We can also look at other funding mechanisms, microloans, cryptocurrency these types of things that might be outside the traditional funding mechanisms. Also, we need to unify the needs within the community. This is asset-based community development, the asset mapping that can be done, understanding a collective voice in a sense of what is it that we really can come to grips with as far as a common agenda, and then also allowing that to report back from community meetings so that people are in the loop, so that we kind of hold our city officials and our agencies in a accountable way. And lastly, looking at sharing the resources between groups. We're all in this together. I know that's a cliched phrase, but we really need a neighborhood learning community that's modeled after a professional learning community, that we're working together, pulling together resources, understanding, and figuring out how to do the long game work that's necessary and get past some of the stuff that's held us back in the past. So a really good reference for this, how do we go through this process, is really comes from this beyond collective impact model. Collaborating for equity and justice, moving beyond collective impact. This is by Tom Wolfe, Meredith Minkler, Susan Wolfe, and a few others. And this is from a Nonprofit Quarterly. And this is really based to figure out how to really look at racial issues and justice, equity and justice. So principle number 1, explicitly address issues of social and economic injustice and structural racism. There's a quote right here, I'm reading out of it. The reality is that race and ethnicity and social class are far greater predictors of social and economic mobility than individual ability, motivation, and hard work. And this is in part because racial, ethnic, and class-based inequities are often entrenched in policies and practices. So even that quote there that's in this article, it goes back to the color of law. So that's number 1. Number 2, employ a community development approach in which residents have equal power in determining the coalition or collective's agenda and resource allocation. This is important because we want to make sure that everybody has a seat at the table. I know I say that a lot, but making sure that that's represented. And if someone is missing, we need to do all that we can to pull them in and try to figure out that gap. So this quote that I'm pulling from the article looks at the importance of using a community development approach that originates at the grassroots level. This cannot be top down. This doesn't work that way. It's got to be from what residents begin to pull together and surface up. I actually am hopeful for 2019 because I begin to see that happening through 2018. So again, continuing with this quote, the approach requires a collective design and implement intentional strategies to engage the community. So this is really focused on engaging the community, particularly residents that are most affected by inequities and injustices in ways that are attendant of power relationships and disparities that are sometimes unseen, which we need to actually push out and get into these areas and really discuss these important topics. Number 3, to employ community organizing an intentional strategy as part of the process. Work to build resident leadership and power. So this is, again, at the grassroots level. We're going to pull that together and building each other up. That takes time, effort, that's relationship building, that's social capital building. We need social infrastructure for that to happen. It just doesn't happen. Certain groups in the city, I think, have been able to do that, but they kind of do that in a group mentality and don't let other people in. So I think that's something to look at. Again, a quote I'm pulling is a weakness in most community-based coalitions, collaborations. Partnership is the absence of community organizing. So this is the power necessary to demand and share in decision making. So it's got to be that process. So they've looked at three things. I think that's a really good, important discussion in here. So one is analyze the existing. First, the community organizations have to look at the intentional and be intentional about their analyzing the current situation. What's really already happening. Number two is prioritize leaderships from those most affected who need their voice heard. And the third is capacity for conflict. We need to actually allow for places where we can disagree. That's currently not in our political landscape. We tend to shut down because we disagree. It's better to actually push through these conflicts because what we're going to do is have a better understanding of those who are not us. And that's what we are going to challenge our biases that we have and be able to see another perspective and find out why that perspective is important to have. Hopefully that we can find a consensus in this process. Number 4, focus on policy, systems, and structural change. McAfee and his colleagues, again quoting from this article, collective impact partnerships should plan to amplify the possibilities inherent in the local successes and translate the lessons and insights into systems, policy, and structural change needed to have sustained impact for the whole populations, So again, that goes back to the idea that we need a body that's going to be learning. This is pretty much describing this professional learning community or a neighborhood learning community that's going to take and make sure that these partnerships are impacting each other in a positive way. Number 5, I'm going to build on the extensive community engaged scholarship and research over the last 4 decades that show works that acknowledges complexity and evaluates it appropriately. So again, measured data collection, measuring, thinking the things rational, even though it's mixed within emotional. So we need to kind of pull those things apart, understand why we get emotional, why we're actually attracted to certain things or repelled by certain things. But then we've got to get back and look at the data that's there. So this is one thing is that we need to push into and making sure that we've got the kind of the best practice. So as part of this discussion in this article, they're stating even as early as 2000, they had a comprehensive review of collaborative community partnerships. This is Rosas and Fawcett who did this. They're including the systems change and what's effective. So first is having a clear vision and mission. Number 2, having an action plan for community and system change. 3, leadership that was competent in communication, meeting facilitation, negotiating, networking. Number 4, documentation and evaluation systems that capture immediate outcomes to help document the process, celebrate accomplishment, identify barriers, and redirect activities when necessary. Number 5, technical assistance and support. Number 6, financial resources. Number 7, making outcomes matter. What's important is that if you even take those 7 things and set up a neighborhood group and you set these 7 things up, you would be ultimately doing better if this would be your focus. So I think there are groups out there that are looking for this type of support. I know I've said it in passing that I would believe that Harrisburg should have a Center for Nonprofit Excellence. Not that we need new or more nonprofits, but we need to do what we're doing better. So number 6 is build for core functions for the collaborative based on equity and justice that provide basic facilitating structures and build member ownership and leadership. All right, what that's pretty much saying is that we're approaching this role of a convening group that has focus on coordination, communication, and facilitation. If you can build around this so that we continue to walk through, it's strengthened that group. So what this does in reading from this article, the shift from backbone organization, which sometimes can backslide into a top-down approach. So facilitating these structures in a way that still keeps it as a flat level and not top-down. This is something we can focus on. And it's outlined here. 4 points: security and providing expertise and resources required to sustain the collaborative and also implement action plans. I'm going to help coordinate member activities, serve as a centralized communication source for information shared among collaborative partners and stakeholders who are not members of the collaborative, and managing administrative details. This is in the record keeping, the making meeting arrangements, the distributing of agendas and meeting minutes, all this thing. So there's a lot of admin that goes with that. with all this said, it's very easy to say, well, let's just make neighborhood groups for all 15 wards and 28 precincts. Well, to try to do all that and expect these things to run well is a huge ask, particularly when we haven't developed this from within. This goes back to focusing on the triple bottom line, the people in places. Well, we don't have the people developed with this stuff and understanding this mindset, or we don't have the places for these things that happen and incubate. So this is critical. If we were to take in this 2019 and review through what we've done as community members and educators and community organizers in Harrisburg, think through this and figure out how to best impact your organization, not even just an organization. Just do this personally. Be better with meeting minutes, be better with documentation, be good record keepers, be good collaborators. Working with the Foundry Makerspace, I've learned that the best thing we can be doing is within the 4 C's for 21st century learning. This is communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity. If we are operating these modes and modeling these modes, we are going to be doing better and actually impact the next generation to do the same.